Good Polish-American relations have been a key part of Polish national security for decades. This doctrine is a cornerstone of Polish diplomacy. One man, however, threw a wrench into it all: Włodzimierz Czarzasty, the new Marshal of the Sejm. The American ambassador to Poland, Tom Rose, announced that Washington would cut all contact with Czarzasty. We will have no further dealings, contacts or communication with the Marshal of the Sejm, Czarzasty, whose outrageous and unprovoked insults directed against President Trump has made himself a serious impediment to our excellent relations with Prime Minister Tusk and his government. The incident was sparked by the following words from Czarzasty. President Trump is destabilizing the situation in organizations like NATO, the United Nations and the World Health Organization by pursuing a policy of force and transactionalism. This means I will not support the nomination of Trump for the Nobel Prize because he does not deserve it. Marshal Włodzimierz Czarzasty is a holdover from Poland's past close relations with Russia. Putting him in the position of Marshal of the Sejm is clear proof that Donald Tusk's coalition is keeping close contacts with Russia. The Americans don't like this very much. The Polish people themselves don't like it. If Marshal Czarzasty comes out and attacks President Trump, I'm not at all surprised that the Americans do not want to talk to Czarzasty. He is compromising and destroying relations with the United States. What's more, after Ambassador Rose's statement, Włodzimierz Czarzasty doubled down and Prime Minister Donald Tusk went so far as to back him up, once again undermining Poland's alliance with the United States. Mr. Ambassador Rose, allies should respect, not lecture each other. At least that's how we here in Poland understand partnership. Not only does Sejm Marshal Włodzimierz Czarzasty have problems explaining his social and business contacts in the East, but he is also demolishing Polish-American relations. During the communist era, the United States was the communists' greatest enemy. Times have changed, but the post-communist mentality of Czarzasty has not. The current ruling coalition has chosen such a Marshal of the Sejm, a man who does not understand basic diplomacy. Sejm Marshal Włodzimierz Czarzasty has been on thin ice for some time now. He refuses to answer simple questions about his contacts with a suspicious Russian businesswoman linked to the Kremlin. Mr. Czarzasty, this whole situation is not about you. It is about the security of the Polish state. The question is fundamental. Why, for over 20 years, have you not undergone the procedure that allows you to obtain security clearances? Why have you not submitted a personal questionnaire? Why do you choose to resign from the Special Services Commission rather than obtain such a certificate? The questions are mounting, but instead of facing the truth, I have not been given any information about a threat resulting from my past. The Marshal chooses to evade all questions. Instead, he chose to lash out at President Karol Nawrocki, who convened the National Security Council for February the 11th. Among other things, the issue of Czarzasty's suspicious connections with people from the Russian establishment will be discussed there. Marshal Włodzimierz Czarzasty's communist past is a problem. By highlighting various issues related to this, the president is raising an important point of doubt. Czarzasty, on the other hand, is responding by attacking the president very harshly, even brazenly.
I sam rzuca w kierunku Karola Nawrockiego oskarżenia, mówiąc o rzekomych podejrzanych kontaktach prezydenta ze środowiskiem pseudokibiców i osobami powiązanymi z przestępczością zorganizowaną.
Takie zagrywki to po prostu świadczą o małości pana.
Czarzasty himself makes accusations against Karol Nawrocki, talking about the president's alleged suspicious contacts with hooligans and people linked to organized crime. Such moves simply demonstrate the personal pettiness of Czarzasty. How did he become the Marshal of the Sejm? When he was elected, he paid homage to Prime Minister Tusk without saying anything about being the Marshal for all MPs, all parties, how he would try to conduct the proceedings. He just said that he would follow the line of Tusk's coalition, and that is indeed what is happening. Donald Tusk summoned Czarzasty, now the second highest ranked person in the Polish state, to determine a strategy to attack President Nawrocki. Should Włodzimierz Czarzasty, as Marshal of the Sejm, publicly explain his Russian social and business contacts? Yes or no? That is what the services are for, first and foremost, and as I understand it, this is a matter for the services, and if there are doubts, the services should resolve them. In times of such great international tensions and hybrid warfare, any politician who has such complex and long-standing relations with the Russians should set off alarm bells in all types of services dealing with the security of the Polish state. After all, we should be 100% certain that the second most important person in the country makes these important decisions on his own behalf and is not subject to any influence from a hostile power. This certainty is glaringly lacking, and doubts about Marshal Czartoryski are growing. He has already lost the trust of the Americans and now has to explain several issues. What is at stake is not the Marshal's emotional well-being, but the national security of Poland. It is still unclear how exactly the current authorities want to spend the loans from the EU's SAFE programme, because the Polish application containing 139 projects is still secret. This is despite the fact that the application for loans worth nearly €44 billion was submitted to Brussels at the end of November last year. Now, the deputy head of the Ministry of National Defence promises that the government will disclose the list of projects sent from Warsaw. It will be made public in the coming weeks after consultations with the European Commission. This is a programme that is of great importance to all Poles, and obviously these tasks must be made public. But today we have a situation where officials in Brussels know what we want to buy, while the Polish public still does not. Added to this are questions about the budget deficit and its real impact on defence spending. Tusk's government argues that loans from the EU's SAFE programme will be a panacea for the country's financial problems. The government said that these would be additional funds, but in reality they will be money that we will use to fill the budget deficit generated by this government in the defence budget. To put it bluntly, the defence budget has been reduced by the amount that we will obtain from the SAFE fund. At the moment, it seems that this programme is primarily beneficial to the Ministry of Finance, who can reduce the position known as the Army Forces Support Fund and shift the financing of the Army's armament to a programme financed by the European Union. All the more so because the problems with spending the Armed Forces Support Fund earmarked for financing the modernisation of the Army have not disappeared at all. Last year, the government did not spend 20 billion zloty from this fund. 2 years ago, another 20 billion zloty from this fund remained unspent. I appealed to the government for transparency and for them to finally engage in a substantive debate. But the government is not eager to debate military spending. It also avoids specifics on details of EU loans. The government claims that everything will somehow work out and that everything will be fine. All the doom and gloom from the political opposition is pointless. However, I do have quite serious doubts. I would like to see all these calculations. Poland issued bonds in euros in January at around 3.76%. The Commission is giving a preferential loan at 3 to 4%. We have to ask ourselves the fundamental question as to whether this loan will actually be preferential enough to make purchases based on a list that is currently classified. Another unknown is the financing of agreements negotiated during the Law and Justice government for the supply of defence equipment from the United States and South Korea, because it is clear that they cannot be financed with EU loans. In the United States and South Korea, we are buying with funds from the national budget. After all, we will not and do not finance arms purchases solely from the SAFE. The 201 billion allocated in the 2026 budget is the best confirmation of this. We are dealing with multi-directional financing of these purchases. I think there is no need to look for sensationalism. Won't there be a problem with financing these contracts with the United States and South Korea? Contracts with the United States and Korea are primarily financed from the state budget, and there are no problems with financing them. However, the offset with Korea, for example, is very important here, so that the tanks are assembled in Poland, specifically in Gliwice. The problem is that military equipment purchased outside the EU was supposed to be manufactured in Poland. This was supposed to be the case, for example, with the Korean K2 tanks, which were to be built in Poznan. After Tusk's government took power, the agreement with the Koreans fell through due to the authorities' inaction. The money borrowed from Brussels will not change that. We will deprive ourselves of the opportunity to finance these purchases in the United States and Korea in favor of illusory purchases in the European arms industry, which today has no production capacity to ensure the production of equipment for the needs of the Polish army. They are unable to even meet the needs of their own countries. It is well known that Germany, the country with the strongest defence industry in Europe, is not interested in loans from SAFE. The question is whether this is because Berlin is to take over the production of military equipment financed by EU loans to be repaid by future generations of Poles. The authorities argue that loans from the SAFE programme are a great opportunity for the Polish defence industry, although it is unclear what kind of opportunity.
czasów rządów PiSu
During the Law and
pieniądze szły
Justice
albo do
government,
Stanów
money went
Zjednoczonych,
either to
albo
the
do
United
Korei,
States or to
ale
Korea,
nie szły do
but not
Polski.
to
To jest
Poland.
fundamentalna
This is
zmiana.
a fundamental
Ponad
change.
80%
Over 80%
wydatków
of
z
safe
programu
program
SAFE
spending
będzie
will be
zainwestowana
invested here in
tutaj, w
Poland, in
Polsce,
our
w naszym
country,
kraju,
in the
w
Polish
polski
defense
przemysł
industry.
obronny.
The proposal that a significant part of these purchases be made in Europe is, in my opinion, very correct and very reasonable, because Europe has been freeloading a bit when it comes to building defense capabilities, relying on the arms industry in other countries. The government has already announced success. It says that we will obtain the entire amount of 44 billion euros. But let's remember that individual contracts will still need to be negotiated with contractors. And it may turn out that contractors will not be able to meet the strict EU criteria that will be imposed. The problem is that the Polish armed industry does not produce modern tanks or aircraft.
Przepływ pieniędzy do...
The flow of money into a significant pool of funds for European industry, mainly German, French and Italian, will take place because we have no other choice. We will have to buy from them because we actually need products that we are not able to manufacture ourselves. The SAFE program is primarily intended to discipline member states and cut off their defense systems from the United States. So I believe it is in our interest not to allow this to happen, and that we should continue the programs started earlier during the Law and Justice Party's term of office. In addition, the big question is the possible conditionality of EU loans, which the current government constantly boasts about.
tych umowach będą zaszyte.
These agreements will contain provisions on conditionality. Conditionality, as we are well aware, is a political tool in the hands of the European Union. We experienced this in the case of the National Recovery and Resilience Plan, where these funds were frozen solely because Poland was ruled by a conservative government. On the European side, we have a capricious donor who at some point, using the conditioning mechanisms enshrined in the agreements, can say, well, you are not meeting some requirements related to this particular project, so we will withhold the next tranche.
Trzymamy następną transzę.
We will see if and when the government will disclose the details of the SAFE program loans.
Earlier today, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and the Prime Minister of Poland, Donald Tusk, held a joint news conference in Kiev. Tusk visited Kiev with Polish Finance Minister Andrzej Domański, who is preparing an international conference on the reconstruction of Ukraine after the end of the war. Ukraine-Russia peace talks, backed by the United States, are to be resumed in the near future. We agree that the next meeting will take place in the near future. Regarding the nature of the conversation and what was discussed, they talked about everything. The negotiators consider the information very sensitive and want to come and brief me in detail. It is important that the process is ongoing. We would like faster results, but if the next meeting is planned, it means there is a chance to continue the dialogue, which of course we very much hope will lead to the end of the war. Kiev's delegation raised the issue of further prisoner of war swaps with Russia as part of a prisoner exchange resulting from trilateral talks in Abu Dhabi. Ukraine and Russia exchanged a total of 314 detainees earlier in the day, including 157 Ukrainian soldiers. Those brought home include personnel from the armed forces, the National Guard, and the Border Guard Service. Speaking alongside Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk in Kiev, Zelensky said Ukraine was ready to swap domestically produced drones for air defense missiles and Polish MiG-29 fighter jets. Poland is prepared to transfer the aircraft if the need persists. Both sides had also discussed a possible reciprocal arrangement. I know that Ukraine needs various types of air defense, including above all certain types of missiles. We cannot help with everything. However, if the need for MiG aircraft remains, Poland is ready at this moment to transfer those MiGs. We also spoke here about a mutual exchange. Zelensky also said Ukraine and Poland were exploring closer energy cooperation, including strengthening cross-border power grid links, as Ukraine's energy infrastructure has been heavily damaged by recent Russian airstrikes.
A standing ovation in the Indian parliament says more than any statement by the government in Delhi. The US-India agreement is not only a trade deal, but part of a broader geopolitical restructuring of the energy and raw materials market. Washington wants to increase its presence in one of the world's largest markets, while limiting the space for Russian suppliers. Since the beginning of the war in Ukraine, India has become one of the main recipients of Russian oil, which provides the Kremlin with stable financial inflows. At the same time, the energy market in the region also includes raw materials from Iran, which is subject to US sanctions.
India is coming in and they're going to be buying
Venezuelan oil as opposed to buying it from Iran. So we've already made that deal, the concept of the deal.
This concept has now been followed by specific arrangements. These indicate that Delhi will significantly reduce supplies from Russia in exchange for oil from the Western Hemisphere. Indian Prime Minister Modi agreed to stop buying Russian oil and buy much more from the United States and potentially Venezuela. This will help end the war in Ukraine. At the same time, Washington is building a global network of cooperation on strategic minerals, raw materials essential to the technology, energy, and defense industries. This is a response to the concentration of the market in the hands of one dominant supplier, China.
I fell in love with the design of these things, but forgot that in order to design something, you have to be able to build it, and in order to build it, you have to have the fundamental materials necessary to make it with. That's the key goal of a critical mineral supply, and today it's heavily concentrated in the hands of one country. And that lends itself to, at worst case scenario, being used as a tool of leverage in geopolitics, but it could also lend itself to any sort of disruptions, like a pandemic or anything that could political instability.
The revolution in the geopolitical puzzle has not escaped Moscow, which, for now, is pursuing a policy of denial and evasion. However, the stakes are enormous, hence the lack of aggressive statements. India's position is well known. The Indian authorities have repeatedly indicated, both publicly and in talks with their Russian partners, that New Delhi is guided solely by its own interest in economic cooperation and makes sovereign decisions based on commercial viability. New Delhi clearly communicates that economic development requires partnerships in strategic sectors, energy, technology, and infrastructure. In these areas, the Americans are the only ones besides China, and this is of great importance to New Delhi. As India moves towards Viksit Bharat, a developed nation, it will be crucial to increase our capabilities in energy, aviation, data centers, nuclear power, and many other areas. The United States is a leader in these sectors. Therefore, it is natural that we focus on trade opportunities that will expand both imports and exports. This agreement is also important for Europe. It goes beyond just trade. Reducing global demand for Russian raw materials increases the effectiveness of sanctions and weakens Moscow's financial base. At the same time, the development of alternative supply chains for minerals and energy cuts off dependence on China. It seems the Americans have launched a strategic offensive and, after months of threats and rocking the global economy, are now setting sail, picking and choosing who they decide to invite on board.